Hi, it's this bearded weirdie again, here to talk about another passage of scripture, actually, another story I would imagine most people are familiar with. If they are not, if you simply Google um, Prodigal Son, it'll bring up a relatively short passage of scripture that if you want to read before this, if you are not familiar with, pause and do that. Anyway, for those of you not pausing, and for those of you who just come back, um, my thoughts and my personal experiences on the ideas of the prodigal son. First and foremost, these ideas are opinions. Very little is. Don't quote me as gospel. I guess that's all I'm saying. These are opinions of a man who's read the book, and I challenge, compel, implore you that if you think I'm not right, call me on it. Look it up. Anything. But without any further ado, my opinions. I think really the prodigal son, whether people have thought about it or not, is one of the most universal parables that Jesus talks about. And in that I mean, not that everybody knows somebody that did something like that, as far as, got a pile of money and then did stupid things with it in their youth. And that's true. We can all think of somebody that did that. Some of us are people that did that. I was somebody that did that. But my point is, not that some people go out and squander all of the money that they should have been wiser with, and that's the indiscretions of youth. I mean, as much as that's true that youth breeds wild indiscretion, but I think for me, when I say everyone is a prodigal child, um, the state that the prodigal son finds himself after leaving his father's farm with, an untold fortune, a lot, and goes out, he wines, he dines, he woos friends until he runs out of cash, and then he loses friends, just like anybody. I mean, most people, once again, have experienced fair weather friendships and such like that, and for him, after that, he ended up, hired himself out as a pig herder, and was left in a state where he wanted to eat, he would rather eat refuse. He would eat the pod. He was jealous of the pods the pigs were eating. He would have rather eaten, leftover, half-eaten food at that point, or he longed for it, I should say. He said he longed for that. Now, the thing of that is, no, none of us have lived, I would imagine. The irony, though, during this time in my life, I did live with a pig, two pigs. So for me, there's a little more of a literal pig example in my life. But most of us can think of a time where we decided we would eat ramen for a month instead of seeking help, or maybe it's PB&J for an indeterminate amount of time because we would rather spend our money on cigarettes, on movies, on dating, on anything else. And so we make those choices of what we want to do versus what we know to be better or best or good even. And I think that's one of those most basic choices, is that a lot of people will gladly, sacrifice nutrition at the very least, if not, just feeding themselves, period, to do what they want to do with their life. And talking to people from other countries, that's one of the things that a lot of them don't understand is why their compatriots frequently choose to move to America, make a fraction of what they make in their home country, and on top of that, live in relative squalor. But there are ubiquitous drinks and drugs, and no one to judge you about it. And so they come here, and in the vernacular of the story, they choose to live with pigs. Because because what we want is is paramount to what is good for us. Like, and for me, that's, I mean, to digress slightly into another biblical reference, but for me, that's why the Garden of Eden. Everybody's like, it's entrapment. It's a God that wanted people to fail, and to that, firstly, if there's not an option, it's not love. It's mind control. So if there was not an option for choosing to obey or disobey, then then it isn't love. It's a mandate. It's an imperative. It's no choice. And as much as, I mean, some people do think otherwise, most of us can consent that we don't like the idea of loving an automaton. Something that won't change, will always be the same degree of loving, regardless of circumstance, treatment, all of these things. We don't, after a time that becomes boring, we have no interest in it. And on top of that, it's kind of inhumane and psychotic seeming to keep something that doesn't know any different and stuff like that. Especially if it was a human being and say it was a cognizant thing. So that whole idea that God made, or that the tree is put there as entrapment, I think is silly, and once again, it's just to see, and maybe it was an experiment. Maybe we are the first creatures that God ever made that was given the option to love or not love in this way. Because angels have an option, but we also know angels don't seem to be able to be redeemed. But that's another story for another time. The other thing about the Garden of Eden is that whether, the older you get, the less you try and argue this. But and the younger generation, your younger kids, just in general, you'll still find some that will argue, I wouldn't have done it, or I would, I'd never do that. And if I saw God all the time, if all of these things, if the Garden of Eden experience was mine, I certainly wouldn't muck it up like that, and I wouldn't be, making those choices. But what this world, this history, life has shown is that no, we all eat the apple. We all take the fruit because we want to do what is our choice. We want to be doing what we want to do. We want to be right more than we want to be loving, or more than we want to be caring for ourselves or for others. And so, but that's the first part of the prodigal son that I feel we all identify with at some point in our lives. But then there's the second half of the story, which sadly I feel not enough of us get a chance to experience. Now, after the son had been left in squalor for long enough, and after getting miserable enough, he realizes, hey, my dad has slaves, has hired men that live, in luxury compared to this. The least I can do is go back to my family, apologize, see if he'll hire me on as a hand. And so he does that, and I can imagine any one of us that's have to go back to a family after, to apologize, to eat some humble pie, to anything, can think about that walk up, whether it's the walk up the, across town, up the street, up the driveway, whatever it is, just marching towards it. And you can see that door in the distance, that house in the distance. And, once you get there, you're going to have to justify yourself. You're going to have to explain yourself. You're going to have to say why, and I'm sorry, and I didn't mean this, and boy, did I make a mistake. And you're all just, you get yourself psyched up and prepared for what's going to happen. But that's not the reaction that he got, that son. And that's not the reaction that we get when we decide to turn away from those things, turn away from those painful And once again, whether it's treatment of other people or ourselves, but once we want to get away from that and get back to a life of goodness and love. And it's just crazy, that, and for me, I had that literal experience after I was stupid, after I spent, after I squandered away $18,000 or so. I went back to my parents and said I was stupid, and I I didn't, go back expecting to be berated, ostracized. But nevertheless, I was surprised in the way that my family, just in the way that the father in the story, father comes running while the son is still a long ways off. He's spotted. His father runs to meet him. Can you imagine that? Blowing $18,000 on cocaine and stupid living like I did. Something like that. And then not only going home and not being yelled at, but being welcomed. And not just welcomed, the royal treatment. The father grabs the son, rushes him to the house, puts a ring on his finger, gets him new clothes. And he says, kill the fatted calf. For my son has come home. My son was dead, and he is alive again. And not enough of us get to have that moment. And some of us, that moment won't come in this life. Maybe there are no family that will welcome us home on this, corporeal journey. But the fact of the matter is, as I believe in faith, that God will. Not that I hear, and yeah. Now the thing is, a lot of times, the Sunday schools or the children's book versions of the story, they stop there as a two-part. The beginning, the leaving and the returning. There's a third faction in this story, for a third part, that, once again, sadly, more of us have been a part of than we would like to admit. And that is the position, the perspective of the other sibling that stayed behind. He's not nearly as excited as his father to see his brother return home. In fact, he goes to his father and is like, Dad, I've never even asked you for anything. Like, I've never even asked you to, to kill a calf or anything like that for me and my friends to party, and we work here all the time. And yet he goes, screws up everything, sets, who knows what, family business things he might have thrown off, or, if it was a farm, what harvest he would have thrown, all of these things. You can imagine just the frustration of that person who's been loyal and faithful and the good child the whole time, to see that screw up come home. And that bitterness grows, that sense of, righteous indignation, seemingly, that I deserve better treatment than this because I've been here the whole time. What's up with this? And then his dad just said, my son was dead. Now he's alive again. And sometimes we've been those people. As children, we have been those dead sons. Our parents, lose track of us. We lose track of them. Maybe we intentionally, divorce ourselves from each other. But there's always that waiting. I don't know. There's always a time for coming back, and maybe I'm kind of losing my momentum here. There's but that third party there of the brother that stayed behind is, it goes back to what I was saying about the garden and about the fruit. You know, he now is looking there and saying that he wants to be right. He wants to be, you know, justified, vindicated for his actions. And he doesn't understand the difference. You know, he doesn't realize the peril he wasn't in by being here the whole time. He doesn't understand the jeopardy that his sibling has just walked through and made it out of. He doesn't know that the grace that God has showered upon him, that has brought him back to this door. Because he hasn't seen that. He's only seen the absence. And focused on that absence instead of on God. And why? Well, really that's about it, I think. But that's, yeah, I do think, like, we identify with one of those three. Really, I think most of us identify with all of those three at some points in our life. And I guess I just want to leave you all with something that I remind myself and my children of frequently. That in circumstances in this life, we can choose to be loving, or we can choose to be right. But seldom do we get to be both. On those days, there are days where God blesses us and says, here, go do this. You get to be 100% loving and 100% right. And those days are the best. But they are few and far between. So, next time frustration hits, next time, you know, jealousy, anger rear their ugly head, remember, do you want to be loving? Or do you want to be right? And why do you want to be those? Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it.